Today we're talking about, I want to talk about our core values. And we have, as part of what we adopted last week, and with our vision and mission statement, was our set of core values. And these are what they are: spiritual awakening. The one we're going to focus on today is freedom from suffering, which actually comes from Buddhism, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That's a basic principle of Buddhism. And then, of course, integrity and joyfulness, inclusiveness, and stewardship. And we'll be talking about those in the next coming weeks. But today is freedom from suffering is basically the core value that I'd like to talk about today, and in the context of that, that is basic to the idea of Buddhism, and fundamental at the bottom principle, the foundation of Buddhism is the potential for being free from suffering. And of course, Buddhism talks about that. It talks about it in the context of being what? Does anybody know? How does Buddhism produce or approach the idea of gaining freedom from suffering?
There is no lack.
There is no lack. Yeah. But that yeah, and that's one of the principles. But one of the basic concepts of Buddhism is to be free from suffering is to be free from craving. And basic to Buddhism is the concept that craving is the source of suffering. So if you crave something that it causes you for either failure to get it or whatever, but that basic idea of craving is the source of all suffering. And so Buddhism's approach to it is to gain a freedom from craving. So if craving is the problem, the other thing that I've thought about and done for me is I kind of wondered, what if freedom from suffering related to craving comes through satisfaction of the craving? What if that works? And it does to some degree, does it not? I mean, for a moment, there you go. It does to some degree and for a moment, but it doesn't usually produce any real long-lasting experience. And so Buddhism says that freedom from craving rather than satisfaction of craving is kind of the source. We live in an economy and in a culture that actually supports craving, does it not? I mean, most of our economy is built on the idea that what you don't have is built on the concept of lack. It's built and marketing. Most marketing and most of our consumer-based now global economy is based on trying to tell us what we don't have, and with the idea that if you're aware that you don't have it, and the discomfort you feel from being incomplete or not enough or whatever, is that you will have it, and that it will make you work. I notice, being in Las Vegas, this is an interesting experience because it's very much different from Wichita, Kansas, where I just came from. So very much different, I noticed that a lot of times when I pull up at an intersection, there'll be sometimes like a Jaguar in front of me, two Lexuses beside me, and a Mercedes on the other side. And I'm either driving a Honda or a Subaru. So, and I look at all those cars or Corvettes. I mean, there are just huge numbers, Bentleys. I mean, all of these cars that you see in Las Vegas that you don't see other places. And I can remember at a time when satisfying cravings has always was for me the way to reduce suffering, was to get what you wanted, and that kind of a thing. And basic to that principle is it's fundamental to the sense of the ego sense of self that we're born into. And you hear me talk about that a lot in Unity. we talk about it a lot. I think almost all real, authentic spiritual approaches acknowledge that the presence of ego, and in the context of the consciousness of ego, is a consciousness of lack, a fear that there is not enough, and that I won't be satisfied. And out of that comes all of the things we try to do to answer that the ego tries to answer that. And so I think that what happens in Buddhism, and I think also in the teachings of Jesus, is the idea that the reduction of that ego and the sense of lack that comes with the reduction of ego is the way to experience a freedom from craving, and thus a freedom from suffering. And basic to that, most of us, I don't know about you, but I got in unity and saw unity. My first experience with unity was that here's a spiritual approach that may be far more effective than any other approach that I've ever encountered to answering my sense of lack, right? If you do the right affirmations, the right spiritual practices, all of those kinds of things, you can, I can remember the 4T program. When I first got in the 4T program, I did the 4T program because, I didn't have the amount of money that I would have liked to have accessible to me all the time. And I did the 4T program from a perspective of lack. And what it said to me, that is, if I would practice certain kinds of spiritual principles, that would be reduced. And I thought the reduction of that would occur because I would get more money as a result of practicing that. And to some degree, there's some of that did happen. But what happened to me in this spiritual program and in this spiritual living is I began to discover a part inside of me and a reality that lives out here in which there wasn't lack, and that I was enough, and that what I had was enough. And I began to be aware that the experience of life, the experience in the way that I wanted to feel about the experience of life, didn't have its source in external things out here. And that my chasing after those, and oftentimes their failure to fulfill, was what caused me to suffer a great deal. And I think that the suffering even got worse in the context that when I would even be successful at getting some of the things I wanted, it still didn't bring me the level of gratification or satisfaction that I desired, that I was really hoping to have. And so it was through the process of spiritual practices that I began to awaken to this truth inside of me. And it is an awakening that all of us are called to have and called to experience. And Jesus called it, and I think the same thing. I think he was after the same thing. He called it the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, and said that it is within you. And I think what he was talking about, what the Buddha was talking about, what all of these talk about, is that the human condition and the extensive suffering that oftentimes is part of the human condition is generated by a state of mind, a state of consciousness. And that state of consciousness is what we are called to transform or transcend in our spiritual awakening into another state of consciousness. And that state of consciousness is one in which I begin to have some form of awakening to the truth of this eternal presence of divine life and love. It starts to awaken. It's still a mystery to me. I don't understand it and can't fully comprehend it. But I have begun to experience it as a reality. And I can actually almost measure to the degree that that experience has transformed the potential I have for suffering. The potential has been drastically reduced. And I experienced some of the same things. My 2004 Subaru does not look anything like those Bentleys and those Jaguars, that are driving there. But do you know how much I care? A great deal less than I did 20 years ago, or 50 years ago. God, It's getting there. So, but the point being is, I don't care anymore. It just is of not importance to me. And I also, it doesn't bother me a bit that if you own one of those and you enjoy it, that's a good deal. I am happy for you if you enjoy it. I enjoy most of the things I have. And I have made a decision in my life to reduce the number of things I have, because what I don't enjoy sometimes is the responsibility to take care of a lot of stuff, you know. So I don't want to do that. And most of those things, although many of them bring me comfort, they're not things that I really need and that are really important to me. So I don't suffer much. I can just kind of feel for Beth losing her MacBook. You know, mine also went south here a little while ago for a while, and I've dealing with those kinds of things like that, are kind of issues because they become very important to us. But the point of all of this is that Jesus and I think the things that we have in common in the context of core values for our ministry, core values that speak to us who are on this spiritual path. One of those core values is fundamental to it is the freedom from suffering. And it asks us, as it does with most things in our core values, in our mission and our vision, to first have that experience within myself, and for you to have that experience within yourself. And so I have spent time. One of the persons that I recently met, or a while back, was this Father Greg Boyle, who has been just an extraordinary person in parts of Los Angeles, where Homeboy Industries has been a way that he's been effective in developing a way to engage people who were living basically hopeless lives, gang members and drug dealers, and living these lives that were just terrible. And people would tell him, if you keep living this life, you're going to go to prison or you're going to die. One of the two. That's going to be your outcome. All of the people in those gangs know that. That's not telling them anything. They've already figured that out a long time ago, that that's the way they're going to be. And they stay in it, and they have this sense of hopelessness. Well, he has created a way that those people can experience something besides that, called Homeboy Industries. And it's an extraordinary thing if you ever get a chance to look at it. And he's a Jesuit who got sent to one of the worst parishes in L.A. because they didn't know what else to do with him. And he ended up there, and began this process of doing this, and does that. One of the things he talks about when he speaks on this, because he does regularly to groups of people, he talks about the fact, just as a kind of an aside, about an inconvenience that he has, which is cancer. So he has cancer, and he mentions it as a sideline, as it inconveniences him. It's a real pain in the ass to have cancer when you're trying to do all these kinds of things, kind of stuff like that. So it's troubling. But you just can tell that it doesn't cause him much suffering, because the essence of who he is in what he does, in the values that he lives, and the way that he approaches it. And for me, and so curing his cancer, although he takes chemotherapy and stuff like that, he said he does that, and that's a pain in the ass too, but he does it anyway because he's supposed to have to do it, but he doesn't talk about it the way that some of us would, and the way maybe I would, or something like that, if I were diagnosed with cancer. He just talks about it as one of the inconveniences of life, and you can then tell and see in him that the real essence of who he is, that part of him that he identifies with as who he is the part of him that is engaging, and is engaging with other people in the world in a way that significantly reduces suffering. If there's anything that Jesus was about, that was one of the things he was about. And I think sometimes us in unity, and sometimes us followers of Jesus, look at it a little different than followers of the Buddha and Buddhism. Buddhism talks about spiritual practices that release you from the phenomena of craving, from the ego self, and are tended to move us away from the ego self into a greater experience of our higher self. Many of us who come into unity and follow the teachings of Jesus because of his experience with healing, and with the history or the stories about Jesus, and many of the stories about his reduction of suffering was when people came close to him and had the experience of this Christ, of this divine energy. It would generate a healing experience, and oftentimes they attributed that to him. But he would often say, no, it's something in you that was doing it. But he would also say, oftentimes, that you have come close to the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven. And what I would propose to you is that what was radiating from Jesus was this awareness, this experience of the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. This divine potential was radiating. And when you would get close to him, you would have, it would trigger that same potential in you because it exists in you. And he would say that. It is something in you that healed you. But it would be when we would come close and he would have that shared spiritual experience of that energy, that it would do that it would create that kind of experience from suffering. So some of us, a lot of us have come into unity from the idea that I would like to have the experience of the Christ in the context of healing me. And what we discover, or bringing me prosperity or that kind of thing, what we discover is actually the awakening of this truth inside of us. And that awakening inside of us, which when we are awake, we do not know of lack. There is no lack. When we are awake, we are in touch with the presence of the perfecting life and love, of the divine life and love of God. We are aware of it as the essence of our being. And in the context of that, there is no suffering, there is no lack, there is no fear. And as that begins to be more of a dominant part of us, we find ourselves relieving that. So we are called then to do something like it is in the context of both Buddhism and then in the essence of the teachings of Jesus, which is discover that the kingdom of God, this freedom from suffering, is among us and is within us, and in fact it is not somewhere else, but we find it inside of us. And then we find it even greater when I can connect with you and you're awake, and you can connect with me, and we can connect with all of us together and being awake, and we continue. That's why I go to unity. You could study all of this stuff by yourself, but I guarantee you that it is trying to be in the presence, or your choice to be in the presence of other people who are also awakening, that opens you up to a greater experience of it. That's why I think we should be here. That's why all that we do, the meditation, the music, and and hopefully the message, all help us do that. I just, I'm a believer in the power of music. In some of the unity ministries I've served in, music is primarily entertaining. And then some of them, it has some inspirational part to it. Of the things that human beings do that do not have suffering associated with it, music is one of the number one. Is it not? Huh? Is it not? And so that's why when we have musicians like this, it should not only entertain you, it should inspire you, and we should get engaged in the music. We should be engaged in it, and we should be participating in the music, standing up, clapping, doing whatever it is that can make us. Sometimes, there are some of the Pentecostal churches that are much better at doing that than us, and I kind of envy them occasionally, because of how they're good at that. But I think it's that energy. There is just, have you ever seen somebody who is a really good musician say, I hate my job? No, that doesn't happen. That's probably one of the most wonderful things that human beings are capable of doing, is making music that comes from the place of the heart and the mind. Oftentimes, I play the blues harmonica, So, not like Beth. I was going to play here when I first came until I heard her, and now I'm not going to. But I played a little bit, and I got introduced to the blues harmonica after I got sober. Now that's a real pain in the ass, you know. I mean, if you're going to do the blues, you need to be drinking and suffering, you know. And I was on the road away from suffering and getting into playing the blues harmonica. I thought the universe has a sense of humor, you know, kind of about things like that, you know. So, but you know, that's one of the things. This ministry has some of the best music that I've experienced in Unity ministry in my 25 years. You guys have it here, you know. And it needs to be. Yeah, you better get in here, Beth. You know, and their capacity to create music that is engaging, not just entertaining, but engaging, is really wonderful. And that's part of what makes this happen. When we're together and have that experience of that kind of music with that kind of energy and that kind of talent and that kind of blessing, because the people that are doing this music for us are committed to this unity movement too, and to the spiritual process. So we have some wonderful resources here. And so in the context of that, it just simply gets back to the same message, is that we are moving from a state of consciousness, an inner experience that we have, an inner reality that we are waking up to and that we call us to do. It is the capacity to no longer identify as my sense of self of the things that are wrong with me. So I have some chronic illnesses. Have a number of them that at 76 are just part of who I am. But they're inconveniences. They're not who I am. They're just little inconveniences of life that I experience like that, you know. But they're really not who I am, because I don't identify with them as much now as I identify with the truth of who I am. That this living presence of divine life and love is my truth. And I am gradually, over the years, have been identifying more with that truth than with this other truth that relates my sense of self to whatever experience I'm having at the current moment, of an experience of lack or sickness or anxiety or depression or anger or resentment or whatever. I just don't connect with those as a truth. I still experience in them. I think I had a resentment yesterday about something. And I thought to myself as I was having it, look at me, I'm having a resentment. You know, and I could just disconnect from that experience and observe it as being something what I am. And that is what reduces the suffering that comes out of that. When I connect with the resentment and believe that is the truth. Or when I connect with any of those negative states of mind and believe that they are the reality about me, I suffer when that happens. Have you had that experience? So that's our second core value is we are going to support ourselves, move ourselves, do spiritual practices in order to reduce our own suffering. Share that with each other. This awareness of the consciousness that finds itself free of suffering. Share that with each other and hopefully create something in the whole unity movement as the unity movement expands, that transforms the world that we're in. So that's it. This is our vision then, a world powerfully transformed through the shared spiritual awakening of all humanity. It actually makes sense, does it not? The vision? This really does make sense. And then, of course, our mission is to advance the movement that's calling us to that experience. So that's what we're doing as Unity of Las Vegas, is we're doing our part in this little corner to advance this movement the much that we can. That's where about. I just wanted also